There comes a moment, usually somewhere in the fifth decade of life, when you begin to notice that not everyone your age is aging in the same way. You see people 10 or 15 years older than you who move with ease, who remain sharp and engaged, who seem to be living fully rather than simply surviving. And you see others, sometimes younger, who have already begun to slow down, to accumulate limitations, to accept decline as inevitable. The difference between these two paths is not primarily about genetics or luck or access to exotic treatments. It is about something far more accessible and far more interesting. It is about understanding how the body actually works and what it needs over the long arc of decades. Most of what determines whether you remain capable and independent in your later years comes down to patterns so simple they are easy to overlook. And that is precisely what we are going to explore. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The Long View. Understanding the patterns that shape healthy aging. Part 1. A different way of thinking about growing older. There is a question that eventually occurs to most people as the years accumulate. It usually arrives quietly, perhaps while watching someone older navigate a simple task with difficulty, or while noticing small changes in one's own body that were not there a decade ago. The question is simply this: what actually determines how well a person ages? For something that occupies so much human attention, the answers are surprisingly difficult to find in any single place. The information landscape is crowded with promises of reversal, with products that claim to turn back time, with protocols that demand religious adherence to complicated regimens. Beneath all of that noise, however, there is something far more interesting and far more useful. A set of patterns that have emerged from observing large populations over long periods. From studying communities where people routinely live well into advanced age while maintaining function, and from understanding the basic biology of how human bodies respond to the accumulated effects of daily choices. This is not about discovering a single secret or finding the one food that changes everything. It is about stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. What becomes clear when you take that longer view is that healthy aging is not mysterious. It is not reserved for people with superior genetics or access to exotic treatments. It follows predictable patterns. And those patterns, once understood, offer something more valuable than any protocol. They offer a framework for thinking about how to live in a way that respects the body's needs while allowing for the flexibility and enjoyment that make life worth living. The sections that follow explore these patterns across several domains. There is no single order of importance because the domains interact with one another. What you eat affects how you move. How you move affects your mental state. Your mental state affects your social connections. Your social connections affect your physiology. It is all connected. And understanding those connections is the first step toward building a life that supports function and well-being across decades. Part 2. The biology of aging as a foundation. Before exploring specific strategies, it is useful to understand, in simple terms, what happens inside the body as the years pass. Aging is not a single process, but a collection of changes that occur simultaneously across multiple systems. The language scientists use to describe these changes can become technical quickly, but the basic concepts are accessible and worth knowing because they explain why certain habits matter more than others. At the cellular level, several things happen over time. Cells accumulate damage from normal metabolic processes. The energy-producing structures inside cells, called mitochondria, become less efficient. The immune system gradually becomes less precise in its responses. The lining of blood vessels loses some of its flexibility. The body becomes slightly less efficient at clearing out damaged proteins and cellular debris. The communication networks between cells, involving hormones and other signaling molecules, become less coordinated. None of this is dramatic on a day-to-day basis. The changes are measured in fractions, but over decades, they accumulate in ways that determine whether a person remains capable and engaged or gradually loses function. The important insight from aging research is that the rate of these changes is not fixed. While the underlying processes are universal, the speed at which they progress varies enormously between individuals. This variation is not primarily explained by genetics. Studies of identical twins, who share the same DNA, show that they age at different rates depending on their life circumstances. The dominant factors are environmental and behavioral. This is where the practical value of understanding aging biology becomes clear. If the rate of age-related change is modifiable, then the question becomes, what factors consistently appear in people who age well? What patterns do they share? And how can those patterns be translated into principles that anyone can apply? Part 3. The foundation of cellular maintenance. The role of hydration in basic function. It is easy to overlook the most fundamental aspects of physiology because they seem too simple to matter. Water is a perfect example. There is nothing glamorous about hydration. And yet, every system in the body depends on adequate fluid intake to function properly. The human body is approximately 60% water. Blood is mostly water. Muscles are mostly water. The brain is about 75% water at birth. And while that percentage declines with age, the organ remains critically dependent on hydration for everything from neurotransmitter production to waste clearance. The challenge is that the sensation of thirst becomes less reliable with age. The signals that tell the brain the body needs fluid become weaker and slower. By the time an older adult feels thirsty, dehydration has already progressed to a point that affects function. This is not a matter of willpower or attention. It is a physiological change that happens to everyone and requires conscious compensation. Mild dehydration, the kind that does not produce obvious symptoms but simply leaves a person slightly below optimal hydration, has measurable effects. Blood becomes slightly thicker, requiring the heart to work harder to pump it through the circulatory system. Mental clarity diminishes. Physical coordination declines slightly. The kidneys, which filter waste from the blood and maintain electrolyte balance, must work harder to concentrate urine. Over time, this extra workload contributes to gradual decline in kidney function. The kidneys are particularly worth understanding because they are both resilient and vulnerable. They can maintain adequate function even after significant damage, which means problems can develop silently over many years. By the time kidney function declines enough to show up on routine blood tests, some loss is already permanent. The body does not regenerate kidney tissue the way it regenerates skin or liver tissue. Protection, in this case, is genuinely better than treatment. The practical approach to hydration is not complicated. It does not require measuring exact amounts or carrying special bottles. It simply requires building awareness and creating habits. Drinking a glass of water at certain times of day, such as upon waking, with meals, and in the evening, creates consistency without requiring constant attention to thirst signals. The goal is steady intake throughout the day, not large volumes consumed quickly, which can actually stress the kidneys and disturb electrolyte balance. The energy factories within cells. Inside nearly every cell in the body are structures called mitochondria. Their job is to convert the energy from food into a form the cell can use. They are, in essence, tiny power plants, and their function is central to how well the body performs at every level. Mitochondria are numerous in tissues that demand high energy, such as muscle, brain, and heart. When they function well, cells have ample energy for repair, communication, and specialized tasks. When they function poorly, cells struggle to meet demands, and the effects accumulate over time. A notable feature of aging is a gradual decline in mitochondrial efficiency. The power plants produce less energy for the same amount of fuel. They also generate more waste products, including molecules that can damage cellular structures if not neutralized. This decline is not inevitable in the sense that it happens to everyone at the same rate. The efficiency of mitochondria is influenced by several factors that are within individual control. Physical activity is one of the most powerful influences on mitochondrial health. Muscle cells respond to exercise by producing more mitochondria and improving the function of existing ones. This is one reason why active people maintain better energy levels and physical capacity as they age. The mitochondria in their cells have been constantly stimulated to adapt and improve. Diet also plays a role. The types of fats and carbohydrates consumed affect how efficiently mitochondria operate. Excessive intake of refined carbohydrates, which flood the bloodstream with glucose rapidly, creates metabolic stress that can impair mitochondrial function over time. Patterns of eating that avoid large swings in blood sugar appear to support better mitochondrial health. There is also growing interest in the timing of meals. Giving the digestive system extended periods without food, such as overnight, allows cells to shift into maintenance mode. During these periods, mitochondria are thought to undergo repair processes that are difficult to accomplish when the body is constantly digesting and absorbing nutrients. The communication network. Cells do not operate in isolation. They constantly send and receive signals that coordinate activity across tissues and organs. This communication network involves hormones, neurotransmitters, and other signaling molecules that tell cells when to divide, when to repair, when to release energy stores, and when to quiet down. With age, this communication network becomes less precise. Signals that once produced clear responses now generate weaker or inappropriate reactions. Cells become less sensitive to hormones like insulin, which tells them to take up glucose from the blood. This reduced sensitivity, known as insulin resistance, is a central feature of metabolic aging and underlies many of the conditions that become more common in later decades. The immune system's communication network also changes. The inflammatory response, which is essential for fighting infection and repairing injury, becomes slightly dysregulated. Low-level inflammation persists even when there is no acute threat. This chronic, low-grade inflammation damages tissues over time and is linked to nearly every age-related condition. What is encouraging about this picture is that the same behaviors that support mitochondrial health and maintain hydration also support better cellular communication. Physical activity improves insulin sensitivity. Certain dietary patterns reduce inflammatory signaling. Adequate sleep allows the brain to clear waste products and reset neurotransmitter levels. The factors that protect one aspect of cellular function tend to protect many aspects simultaneously. Part 4. Patterns of eating that support long-term health. The quality of calories versus the quantity. For much of the past century, nutritional advice focused heavily on amounts. Eat less of this. Eat more of that. Count calories. Measure portions. While total energy intake does matter for weight management, a growing body of evidence suggests that the quality of calories is at least as important as the quantity, and possibly more so for long-term health outcomes. The reason lies in how different foods interact with the body's systems. Two meals with identical calorie counts can produce completely different metabolic responses depending on their composition. One might cause a rapid spike in blood sugar followed by a crash, triggering hunger and stress responses. The other might provide steady energy for hours while supporting cellular maintenance processes. This is not about labeling foods as good or bad in absolute terms. It is about understanding that foods are not just bundles of calories. They are complex mixtures of compounds that influence inflammation, hormone signaling, gene expression, and the behavior of gut bacteria. Over years and decades, These effects accumulate into meaningful differences in health trajectories. Consider the example of refined carbohydrates. Foods made from white flour and added sugars enter the bloodstream quickly because the digestive system does not need to work hard to break them down. The resulting surge in blood glucose triggers a large release of insulin, the hormone that directs cells to take up glucose for energy or storage. When this happens repeatedly, cells can become less responsive to insulin's signal. The pancreas must work harder to produce more insulin to achieve the same effect. Over time, this pattern stresses the metabolic system and increases the risk of developing insulin resistance. Contrast this with foods that contain fiber, protein, and fat alongside carbohydrates. A bowl of oatmeal with nuts and berries, for example, delivers carbohydrates more slowly because fiber slows digestion and the fat and protein further moderate the rate at which glucose enters the bloodstream. The insulin response is smaller and more gradual. Blood sugar remains stable. Hunger does not return quickly. The metabolic system is not stressed by repeated surges. This principle applies broadly. It is not about eliminating entire categories of food, but about understanding how different foods function in the body and making choices that favor metabolic stability. The protective compounds in plants, beyond the basic nutrients of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Plant foods contain thousands of compounds that are not essential for immediate survival, but appear to influence long-term health in important ways. These compounds, often called phytochemicals, are produced by plants to protect themselves from pests, disease, and environmental stress. When consumed by humans, they interact with biological systems in ways that scientists are still working to fully understand. Some of these compounds have antioxidant properties, meaning they can neutralize reactive molecules that would otherwise damage cellular structures. Others influence inflammation pathways, reducing the activity of proteins that promote excessive inflammatory responses. Some appear to affect gene expression, turning on genes that support cellular repair and turning off genes involved in inflammatory processes. The diversity of these compounds matters. Different plant foods contain different phytochemical profiles, and consuming a wide variety increases the likelihood of obtaining the full range of protective effects. This is one reason why dietary patterns that include many different vegetables, fruits, herbs, and spices are consistently associated with better health outcomes. The colors of plant foods offer a rough guide to their phytochemical content. Deep purple blueberries contain anthocyanins, which have been studied for their effects on brain function. Bright orange sweet potatoes contain beta-carotene, which the body can convert to vitamin A. Dark green leafy vegetables contain lutein and zeaxanthin, which concentrate in the retina and support eye health. Red tomatoes contain lycopene, which has been associated with reduced risk of certain cancers. None of this means that every meal must be perfectly balanced or that occasional deviations matter. The body is resilient and designed to handle variation. What matters is the overall pattern over weeks and months. A diet that regularly includes a variety of colorful plant foods provides a steady supply of these protective compounds. The special case of fermented foods. Fermentation is one of the oldest methods of food preservation, and it turns out that the process does more than extend shelf life. It transforms foods in ways that may benefit human health. When bacteria and yeast ferment foods, they break down some components and produce new ones. In dairy fermentation, for example, bacteria consume lactose and produce lactic acid. This lowers the lactose content, making fermented dairy products easier to digest for people who have trouble with fresh milk. The bacteria themselves become part of the food, and consuming them introduces live microorganisms into the digestive tract. The human gut contains trillions of microorganisms that collectively form the gut microbiome. These bacteria, viruses, and fungi play roles in digestion, vitamin production, immune system regulation, and even communication with the brain. The composition of this microbial community varies between individuals and changes over time. Diet is one of the strongest influences on which microorganisms thrive. Fermented foods provide two potential benefits for the gut microbiome. First, they introduce live microorganisms that can temporarily increase the diversity of the gut community. Second, they contain compounds produced during fermentation that can serve as fuel for beneficial bacteria already present. The research on fermented foods is still developing, but early findings are notable. Studies have found that people who consume fermented foods regularly tend to have greater microbial diversity in their guts. Higher diversity is generally considered beneficial because it creates a more resilient ecosystem that can better resist disruption. Examples of fermented foods from different culinary traditions include yogurt and kefir from dairy, sauerkraut and kimchi from vegetables, kombucha from tea, miso and tempeh from soybeans, and traditional sourdough bread from grain. Each provides a different mix of microorganisms and fermentation products, which is another argument for variety. Fats that support structure and function. Dietary fat has endured a complicated reputation over the decades. At various times, it has been portrayed as the primary cause of heart disease, then rehabilitated as essential for health. The current understanding is more nuanced. Different types of fat have different effects on the body, and the balance between them matters more than total fat intake. Fats are not just fuel. They are structural components of every cell membrane in the body. The types of fats incorporated into cell membranes influence how fluid or rigid those membranes are, which affects how cells communicate and how they respond to hormones. Brain tissue is particularly rich in fat, and the composition of these fats affects cognitive function. The long-chain omega-3 fats found in fatty fish, often called EPA and DHA, are notable for several reasons. They are incorporated into cell membranes throughout the body, including in the brain and heart. They influence inflammation pathways, generally reducing excessive inflammatory responses. They affect the electrical activity of heart cells, which may explain the association between fish consumption and reduced risk of abnormal heart rhythms. The body can produce some EPA and DHA from shorter-chain omega-3 fats found in plant foods like walnuts and flax seeds, but the conversion process is inefficient. Direct consumption of preformed EPA and DHA from fish or algae ensures adequate supply without relying on conversion. Monounsaturated fats, abundant in olive oil, avocados, and many nuts, have been associated with better cardiovascular outcomes for decades. The traditional Mediterranean diet, which is rich in olive oil, is one of the most studied dietary patterns and consistently shows associations with reduced rates of heart disease, cognitive decline, and overall mortality. The fats to be more cautious about are the artificially produced trans fats found in some processed foods and, for some individuals, excessive amounts of saturated fats from certain sources. The relationship between saturated fat and health is complex and depends on the overall dietary context. But most evidence suggests that replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats is beneficial, while replacing them with refined carbohydrates is not. Protein and the preservation of structure. Muscle mass peaks in early adulthood and gradually declines thereafter. The rate of decline is modifiable, and preserving muscle is one of the most important factors in maintaining function and independence in later decades. Muscle is not just for movement. It is a metabolic organ that stores amino acids, regulates blood sugar by taking up glucose during activity, and produces signaling molecules that influence other tissues. Loss of muscle mass, a condition called sarcopenia when severe, is associated with frailty, falls, difficulty performing daily activities, and increased mortality. Protein intake is central to muscle preservation. The body constantly breaks down and rebuilds muscle proteins to maintain muscle mass. The rate of synthesis must match the rate of breakdown. Adequate dietary protein provides the amino acids needed for synthesis. There is some evidence that older adults may need more protein than younger adults to achieve the same synthetic response. This is thought to be due to reduced sensitivity to the signals that stimulate protein synthesis. Consuming adequate protein at each meal, rather than concentrating it in one meal, may be particularly important for maintaining muscle mass. Protein sources vary in their amino acid composition. Complete proteins, which contain all 9 essential amino acids that the body cannot produce, are found in animal foods like meat, fish, eggs, and dairy, as well as in soy and quinoa. Plant proteins can be combined to provide complete profiles, as in the traditional pairing of beans and rice. The timing of protein intake relative to activity also matters. Consuming protein after exercise, when muscles are primed to take up amino acids, may enhance the synthetic response. This does not require special supplements. A meal containing protein after physical activity provides the necessary building blocks. Part 5. Movement as medicine for the long term. The body designed for motion. Human beings evolved as moving creatures. For the vast majority of human history, obtaining food, water, and shelter required physical activity. The body's systems developed under conditions of regular movement, and they function best when those conditions are maintained. This is not an argument for intense exercise or athletic performance. It is an observation about the basic requirements of human physiology. Joints need motion to maintain their full range and to keep the cartilage that cushions them healthy. Muscles need regular stimulation to maintain mass and strength. Bones need the stress of weight-bearing activity to maintain density. The cardiovascular system needs periodic challenges to maintain its responsiveness. The lymphatic system, which clears waste from tissues, depends on muscle contraction to move fluid because it has no central pump like the heart. When movement is absent for extended periods, these systems deteriorate. Joints stiffen, muscles atrophy, bones lose density. The heart becomes less efficient. The clearance of waste from tissues slows. These changes happen gradually, which makes them easy to ignore, but they accumulate into the functional limitations that many people accept as inevitable parts of aging. The evidence from populations that maintain function into advanced age consistently shows that movement is woven into daily life, not compartmentalized into exercise sessions. People in these communities walk as part of their daily routines. They garden, tend animals, climb stairs, carry objects, and perform physical tasks that modern societies have largely eliminated through technology. The lesson is not that everyone must adopt a rural lifestyle. It is that movement needs to be distributed throughout the day, not concentrated into a single period followed by hours of sitting. Brief periods of activity, repeated frequently, may be as important as longer exercise sessions. The different types of movement. Physical activity is not a single category. Different types of movement produce different effects on the body, and a complete approach to maintaining function includes several varieties. Aerobic activity, which elevates heart rate and breathing for sustained periods, strengthens the cardiovascular system. It improves the heart's efficiency as a pump, increases the capacity of blood vessels to dilate and constrict, and enhances the muscle's ability to extract oxygen from blood. Walking, swimming, cycling, and dancing are examples of aerobic activities that can be sustained for extended periods. Strength activity, which requires muscles to work against resistance, preserves and builds muscle mass. It also stimulates bone maintenance and improves the connective tissues that support joints. lifting weights, using resistance bands, and performing bodyweight exercises like squats and push-ups are forms of strength activity. Even activities like carrying groceries and gardening count when they provide sufficient resistance. Balance activity, which challenges the body's ability to maintain stable positions, reduces the risk of falls. Falls are a major source of injury and loss of independence in later decades, and balance is a skill that can be trained. Standing on one foot, walking heel to toe, and practices like Tai Chi and yoga all challenge and improve balance. Flexibility activity, which moves joints through their full ranges, maintains the ability to perform daily movements without restriction. Stretching, reaching, bending, and rotating all preserve the mobility that allows independent living. The key insight is that these categories overlap and support one another. Strength training improves balance by making muscles stronger and more responsive. Balance training improves confidence, which encourages more activity. Aerobic training enhances recovery from strength activities. A well-rounded pattern of movement includes elements from all categories. The relationship between movement and metabolism. Physical activity has profound effects on metabolic health that extend beyond the calories burned during exercise. These effects help explain why active people maintain better health even when their diets are not perfect. Muscle tissue is highly responsive to insulin, the hormone that directs cells to take up glucose from blood. When muscles contract during activity, they become even more sensitive to insulin's signal. This increased sensitivity lasts for hours after activity ends, meaning that a single bout of exercise improves blood sugar control for the rest of the day. Regular activity produces lasting improvements in insulin sensitivity. Active individuals require less insulin to maintain normal blood sugar levels, which reduces the stress on the pancreas and lowers the risk of developing insulin resistance over time. Movement also influences how the body handles fats. Active muscles burn more fat for fuel, both during and after exercise. This reduces the amount of fat circulating in the blood and stored in tissues, which in turn reduces the metabolic stress associated with excess fat accumulation. The inflammatory effects of movement are worth noting as well. While intense exercise temporarily increases inflammatory markers as part of the repair process, regular moderate activity reduces baseline inflammation over time. This is thought to occur through several mechanisms, including reductions in fat tissue, improvements in immune function, and changes in the signaling molecules released by muscles. Part 6. The nervous system and the pace of life. Stress as a biological phenomenon. Stress is often discussed as a psychological experience, but it is fundamentally a biological response. When the brain perceives a threat or challenge, it activates a set of physiological changes designed to mobilize energy and prepare the body for action. The sympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the fight or flight system, increases heart rate and blood pressure. It directs blood flow toward muscles and away from digestive and reproductive systems. It triggers the release of glucose from storage to provide immediate fuel. The adrenal glands release cortisol, a hormone that helps sustain these changes and influences metabolism, immune function, and inflammation. This system evolved to handle acute threats that resolve quickly. A predator appears. The body mobilizes. The threat passes. The system returns to baseline. The challenge in modern life is that the system activates frequently in response to threats that are not physical and do not resolve quickly. Work deadlines, financial concerns, relationship difficulties, and constant exposure to disturbing news all trigger stress responses that may persist for hours or days without resolution. When stress activation becomes chronic, the effects on the body accumulate. Persistently elevated cortisol affects sleep, digestion, and immune function. It influences where the body stores fat, promoting accumulation in the abdominal area. It can impair memory and cognitive function over time. Chronic stress is associated with accelerated biological aging, measured through markers like telomere length. The important point is that the stress response itself is not the problem. It is a necessary and functional system. The problem is the mismatch between the environment in which the system evolved and the environment in which many people now live. The solution is not to eliminate stress, which is impossible, but to create conditions that allow the system to return to baseline regularly. Practices that support nervous system balance. Several approaches can help regulate the nervous system and reduce chronic stress activation. These are not exotic or difficult, but they require consistent attention. Regular physical activity is one of the most effective stress regulators. It provides an outlet for the energy mobilized by the stress response. It also produces endorphins and other signaling molecules that improve mood and reduce the perception of stress. The effects of a single session can last for hours, and regular activity produces lasting improvements in stress resilience. Time in natural environments has measurable effects on stress physiology. Studies have found that walking in natural settings reduces cortisol levels and improves mood more than walking in urban environments. The reasons are not fully understood, but may involve reduced cognitive demands, exposure to certain compounds released by plants, and the calming effects of natural patterns and sounds. Social connection is another powerful regulator. The presence of trusted others reduces activity in threat detection regions of the brain and increases activity in regions involved in safety and calm. This is not just psychological. It is physiological. The body interprets social connection as a signal of safety and reduces stress activation accordingly. Adequate sleep is essential for stress recovery. During sleep, the brain processes emotional experiences, resets neurotransmitter levels, and clears metabolic waste. The cortisol rhythm, which normally peaks in the morning and declines through the day, resets during sleep. Insufficient or poor quality sleep disrupts these processes and leaves the nervous system in a state of heightened activation. Mindfulness and meditation practices have been studied extensively for their effects on stress. Regular practice is associated with reduced activity in the default mode network, the brain system involved in mind-wandering and self-referential thought, which often generates worry about the future or rumination about the past. These practices also appear to reduce inflammatory markers and improve regulation of the stress response. The common thread across these approaches is that they provide opportunities for the nervous system to shift out of threat detection mode and into restoration mode. They are not about eliminating challenges, but about creating balance. Sleep is a foundational process. Sleep is not simply a period of inactivity. It is an active state during which essential biological processes occur. The brain consolidates memories and processes emotional experiences. The glymphatic system, a recently discovered waste clearance pathway, becomes highly active and removes metabolic byproducts that accumulate during waking hours. Hormones involved in growth, repair, and appetite regulation are released in specific patterns. The amount of sleep people need varies, but most adults function best with 7 to 9 hours per night. Less than this on a regular basis is associated with increased risk of numerous conditions, including cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, cognitive decline, and mood disorders. Sleep quality matters as much as quantity. Fragmented sleep, even if total time is adequate, does not provide the same restorative benefits as continuous sleep. Factors that affect sleep quality include light exposure, particularly blue light from screens in the evening, caffeine consumption late in the day, alcohol, which fragments sleep even as it helps people fall asleep initially, and irregular sleep schedules that disrupt the body's internal clock. The internal clock, or circadian rhythm, is a master regulator of numerous physiological processes. It influences hormone release, body temperature, metabolism, and sleep-wake cycles. This clock runs on approximately a 24-hour cycle and is synchronized primarily by light exposure. Morning light tells the clock it is daytime and advances it, while evening light delays it. Consistent light exposure patterns help maintain stable rhythms. The practical implications are straightforward. Regular sleep and wake times support the internal clock. Exposure to bright light in the morning helps synchronize rhythms. Dimming lights and avoiding screens in the evening allows the brain to prepare for sleep, creating a cool, dark, quiet sleep environment supports sleep continuity. Part 7. The social dimension of longevity. The evidence for connection. Perhaps the most surprising finding from longevity research is the strength of the association between social connection and health outcomes. Large studies consistently find that people with stronger social ties live longer than those who are isolated. And the effect size is comparable to well-established risk factors like smoking and physical inactivity. This is not a small or subtle effect. One analysis that combined data from multiple studies found that individuals with adequate social relationships had a 50% greater likelihood of survival compared to those with poor or insufficient relationships. The effect was consistent across age, sex, and health status. Several mechanisms likely explain this association. Social connection buffers the effects of stress by providing emotional support and practical assistance. It encourages health-promoting behaviors by creating accountability and shared activities. It may directly influence physiology through the release of oxytocin and other hormones that reduce stress activation and promote calm. There is also evidence that loneliness itself is a physiological stressor. The experience of social isolation activates threat detection systems, as it would have in ancestral environments where exclusion from the group endangered survival. Chronic loneliness is associated with elevated inflammatory markers, impaired immune function, and accelerated biological aging. The relevance of this research for healthy aging is clear. Maintaining and building social connections is not just about enjoyment or quality of life, though those matter. It is about basic biology. The body interprets connection as safety and isolation as threat, and it responds accordingly. Different forms of connection. Social connection takes many forms, and different forms may serve different functions. Close relationships with family and intimate partners provide deep emotional support and a sense of belonging. Friendships offer companionship, shared interests, and opportunities for enjoyment. Community connections. Through religious organizations, volunteer work, clubs, or neighborhoods, provide a sense of being part of something larger than oneself. All of these forms appear to matter, and they are not entirely interchangeable. Someone with a strong marriage but no friends may lack certain benefits. Someone with many casual acquaintances but no close confidant may lack others. Diversity in social connections, like diversity in diet, provides broader coverage of needs. The challenge is that social connections are not static. They require maintenance and effort. Life transitions like retirement, relocation, or the loss of loved ones can disrupt social networks. Maintaining connection in later decades often requires intentional effort to build new relationships and sustain existing ones. This effort is worthwhile not only for its direct effects on health, but because social connection enables other health-promoting behaviors. People are more likely to be physically active when they have companions for activities. They are more likely to eat well when they share meals with others. They are more likely to seek medical care when others encourage them. The effects cascade. Purpose and engagement. Beyond social connection, there is the question of purpose. Why get up in the morning? What gives life meaning? These questions may seem philosophical, but they have measurable associations with health outcomes. Studies have found that people who report a strong sense of purpose in life have lower rates of cardiovascular disease, better cognitive function, and longer survival. The associations hold even after accounting for other factors like health status, socioeconomic status, and social connection. Purpose is not necessarily grand or public. It can come from caring for family, pursuing creative work, contributing to community, engaging with ideas, or simply finding meaning in daily activities. What matters is that there is a reason to engage with life, a sense that one's actions matter. Engagement, the active participation in life, may be as important as purpose. People who remain engaged in activities that challenge and interest them maintain better cognitive and physical function. They have more opportunities for social connection. They experience more positive emotions and fewer periods of depression or anxiety. The implication is that healthy aging is not just about avoiding disease. It is about maintaining reasons to live fully. The practices that support physical health and the practices that support meaning and engagement are not separate. They reinforce one another. Part 8. The environment and its hidden influences. The food environment. Most discussions of diet focus on individual choice, as if people make food decisions in a vacuum. In reality, food choices are heavily influenced by the environment. What foods are available, affordable, convenient, and normalized shapes what people eat, often below the level of conscious awareness. The modern food environment in many countries is dominated by ultra-processed products designed to be highly palatable, shelf-stable, and profitable. These products are formulated with combinations of sugar, fat, salt, and flavorings that override the body's natural satiety signals, encouraging overconsumption. They are heavily marketed and positioned as convenient solutions for busy lives. Navigating this environment requires awareness and intentionality. It means recognizing that the food industry's interests are not aligned with individual health and that the default options in many settings are not the ones that best support long-term well-being. Practical strategies for managing the food environment include shopping primarily in the perimeter of grocery stores, where fresh and minimally processed foods are typically located, planning meals in advance to reduce reliance on convenience options, preparing food at home more often, which gives control over ingredients, and being selective about which processed foods enter the home, reserving them for occasional use rather than daily staples. The movement environment. Similarly, the built environment influences how much people move. Neighborhoods designed for cars rather than pedestrians discourage walking. Sedentary jobs keep people sitting for most of the day. Homes filled with labor-saving devices eliminate movement that would have been routine in previous eras. Creating a movement-friendly environment does not require major life changes. It involves looking for opportunities to add movement to existing routines. Parking farther from entrances adds steps. Taking stairs instead of elevators adds brief periods of vigorous activity. Standing or pacing during phone calls breaks up sitting time. Walking meetings replace sedentary discussions with active ones. Household tasks like gardening, cleaning, and home maintenance all count as movement when done regularly. The principle is to distribute movement throughout the day rather than concentrating it in a single period. Brief, frequent bouts of activity may be as beneficial as longer sessions, and they are easier to maintain because they fit into existing routines. Light and circadian health. Light exposure is an environmental factor that receives less attention than it deserves. The human circadian system evolved under conditions of bright days and dark nights. Artificial lighting has disrupted this pattern, exposing people to light at times when the brain expects darkness and insufficient light during the day when the brain expects brightness. This disruption affects sleep, mood, and metabolic health. Evening light. particularly the blue wavelengths emitted by screens and LED bulbs, suppresses melatonin production and delays sleep onset. Insufficient daytime light exposure weakens circadian rhythms and can contribute to mood disturbances, particularly in winter months when days are short. Managing light exposure involves seeking bright light during the day, ideally from natural sources. Morning light is particularly effective for synchronizing circadian rhythms. In the evening, dimming lights and using warmer, redder light sources supports the brain's preparation for sleep. Avoiding screens for an hour before bed, or using blue blocking features when screens are necessary, reduces circadian disruption. The social environment. The social environment, discussed earlier, is another environmental factor. The people around us influence our behaviors, our stress levels, and our sense of safety. Surrounding oneself with people who support healthy habits makes those habits easier to maintain. Conversely, social environments that normalize unhealthy behaviors create headwinds that require constant effort to overcome. This is not about abandoning friends or family whose habits differ. It is about being aware of social influences and seeking out communities that align with one's values and goals. It is also about recognizing that isolation is itself an environmental factor that affects health, and that maintaining connection requires active effort in a society that often fragments social bonds. Part 9. How the pieces fit together. The interconnectedness of systems. Throughout this exploration, certain themes have recurred across different domains. Physical activity improves metabolic health and stress regulation. Diet affects inflammation and mitochondrial function. Sleep influences metabolism and cognitive function. Social connection buffers stress and encourages healthy behaviors. These interconnections mean that improvements in one area tend to create improvements in others. Someone who becomes more physically active may find it easier to make better food choices because exercise improves mood and reduces stress-driven eating. Someone who improves sleep may have more energy for social activities and better cognitive function for managing complex tasks. Someone who strengthens social connections may experience less stress and greater motivation for self-care. Conversely, deterioration in one area can create a cascade of problems. Poor sleep impairs judgment about food choices. Chronic stress reduces motivation for physical activity. Social isolation increases the risk of depression, which further reduces activity and self-care. The interconnectedness has practical implications. It means that there is no single right place to start. Improving any domain tends to benefit others. It also means that small changes can have larger effects than expected because they trigger positive cascades. The time dimension. Another recurring theme is the importance of time. The effects of habits accumulate slowly. One day of poor eating does not cause metabolic disease. One missed workout does not cause muscle loss. One night of poor sleep does not cause cognitive decline. But years of these patterns produce the outcomes that appear in emergency rooms and clinics. The slow accumulation of effects is both challenging and encouraging. It is challenging because it requires patience and trust in processes that do not produce immediate visible results. It is encouraging because it means that small improvements, maintained consistently, produce meaningful differences over time. This is why the concept of lifestyle is more useful than the concept of intervention. Interventions are temporary. They start and end. Lifestyles are ongoing. They are the sum of daily choices repeated over decades. The goal is not to find the perfect intervention, but to shape a lifestyle that naturally supports health. The individual variation. No two people are identical. Genetics, life history, current health status, and personal preferences all influence what works for a given individual. The principles outlined here are general patterns observed across populations, not rigid prescriptions that apply equally to everyone. Some people thrive on more protein, others on more carbohydrates. Some prefer vigorous exercise. Others prefer gentle movement. Some find meaning in solitary pursuits. Others in community engagement. The task for each person is to translate general principles into a personal pattern that fits their circumstances and feels sustainable. This is where self-awareness becomes important. Noticing how different foods affect energy and mood. Paying attention to how different activities feel. Observing what types of social connection feel nourishing versus draining. These observations provide personalized guidance that no general advice can match. Part 10. A calm conclusion. The search for a single secret to longevity is understandable but misguided. There is no one food, one supplement, or one practice that determines how well a person ages. What exists instead is a set of patterns that, when maintained consistently over time, support the body's natural capacity for maintenance and repair. These patterns are not complicated. They involve moving regularly, eating mostly foods that come from plants and animals rather than factories, maintaining social connections, managing stress, getting adequate sleep, and paying attention to the environments that shape daily choices. They are the kinds of patterns that appear repeatedly in populations where people routinely live long, functional lives. The challenge is not in understanding these patterns. It is in implementing them consistently in a world designed to make other patterns easier. Ultra-processed foods are convenient. Sedentary entertainment is compelling. Social connection requires effort. Sleep is sacrificed for productivity. The environment pulls in directions that do not support long-term health. Navigating this requires awareness and intentionality. It requires recognizing that the default options are not neutral and that maintaining health requires active choices. But it does not require perfection. The body is resilient and forgiving. It responds to overall patterns, not occasional deviations. What matters most is the direction of travel. Small improvements, maintained over time, accumulate into meaningful differences. A few more minutes of movement each day. A few more servings of vegetables each week. A few more hours of sleep each night. A few more moments of connection with people who matter. These are not dramatic changes, but they're the kind of changes that, over decades, determine whether a person remains capable and engaged or gradually loses function. The goal is not to live forever. That is not possible. The goal is to live well for as long as one lives, to maintain the capacity to do the things that matter, to remain engaged with life and with others. The patterns that support healthy aging are the same patterns that make life worth living. They are worth pursuing not for some distant payoff, but for the quality they bring to each day. The single most important takeaway from everything we have explored is this: healthy aging is not about finding one secret or following a perfect protocol. It is about understanding the patterns that support human function and then living inside those patterns consistently enough that they become second nature. The body responds to what you do most days, not what you do occasionally. And the choices that matter most are not complicated or exotic. They are the daily decisions about movement, food, rest, connection, and the environments you create for yourself. If this conversation has prompted any reflection on your own patterns, or raised questions you would like to explore further, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. This library grows richer with each perspective added to it. And if you would like to continue this journey, there are other videos waiting for you here, each one exploring another facet of what it means to age well. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.